everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into The Book of Not Knowing by Peter Ralston today.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, this one was a listener suggestion, so we're excited to unpack it with you
Yeah,
and explore some pretty fascinating concepts about the self and reality.
for sure. Now, this book,
Mm-hmm.
it's not your typical self-help book.
Okay.
Not like a how-to guide or anything.
Right.
Instead, it encourages this radical shift in perspective, and it all starts with embracing not knowing.
Okay, not knowing. I feel like we're getting philosophical already, haha.
Yeah.
But, what does that actually look like? How does this book approach this idea?
So, the Book of Not Knowing is really about challenging how we see ourselves, how we perceive the world around us. It argues that a lot of our deeply held beliefs, our ideas about ourselves, about reality, they're often built on assumptions that we've never really examined.
Okay.
And those assumptions, they can really limit our experience of life.
So it's like we're on autopilot, just following a script we didn't write.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Ralston uses this phrase, conceptual dominance,
Okay.
to illustrate this. So imagine you walk into a room and you see a chair.
Okay.
You automatically might label it, right? A place to sit.
Right, of course, yeah.
But now imagine you're I don't know, doing some vigorous workout in that same room. Suddenly that chair is an obstacle, something to work around.
Totally, yeah. So the chair itself didn't change, but our perception of it did.
Right, exactly. And this conceptual dominance, it extends beyond physical objects to our sense of self.
Okay.
So for example, let's say you were told as a child, you're not good at math. Now, whether or not that's true,
Right.
that belief can actually influence your experiences and choices later in life.
Wow, so it's like these early beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies in a way.
Yeah.
Shaping our reality.
Yeah, and they can prevent us from truly experiencing things authentically.
So then how do we break free from these limiting concepts that we've developed?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Ralston introduces this idea of the uncognized mind.
Uncognized mind. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Uh-huh. All right. He compares it to a refrigerator. Think about it. You open the fridge, you grab a snack. You don't even think about how that food got in there.
Yeah.
You just accept it.
Yeah, totally. Huh?
Right. Now imagine that same principle applied to your thoughts and emotions.
Okay.
How often do we actually question, where did this thought come from? Why am I feeling this way? We tend to just accept these things as us.
Right.
And that's the uncognized mind at work. It's the driving force behind so much of what we think and feel and how we react.
Okay.
Yet it remains hidden from our conscious awareness.
So it's like there's a whole other level of mental activity happening beneath the surface that we're not even aware of that's influencing our experience.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting. If we're not aware of this uncognized mind, Ralston argues we risk mistaking, the output of this hidden mental machinery for our true selves.
Yeah. So it's like we're mistaking the noise of this uncognized mind, all its hidden programming, for who we actually are.
Yeah, that's the idea he's getting at. He says that our conventional sense of self, the one we often cling to, it's actually a construct.
Yeah.
It's put together from beliefs that we've picked up, memories that we hold on to, cultural norms, things like that. It's almost like we're wearing a mask and we've forgotten that there's a face underneath.
And confusing this constructed self, this mask, with our true nature can lead to problems.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. This illusion of a fixed self, it leads to a feeling of emptiness, self-doubt, feeling trapped,
Yeah, totally. I think we've all felt that emptiness even when we achieve things, or that self-doubt that holds us back from really going after what we want.
Exactly. And those feelings, they often come from this very misconception of self. But the good news is Ralston offers a way forward, a way to break free.
Okay.
And it begins with questioning.
Questioning. Questioning everything we think we know about ourselves.
Exactly, yeah. Not just surface level questioning, but a deep dive into the very nature of our experience. He talks about approaching the world with a sense of not knowing, as if for the first time.
Oh, that's interesting. That reminds me of something. I had this coworker, and I had heard some things about them, not good things, before I actually met them.
Okay.
So I kind of went into the situation with all these preconceived notions about who they were as a person. And it took me actually a conscious effort to step back and be like, wait a minute, are these assumptions even true? Let me see this person with fresh eyes.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, it turned out a lot of what I heard was exaggerated or taken out of context. This person was actually really kind and supportive once I got to know them. It was a good reminder that, our preconceived ideas, they can really cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. That's a great example of how powerful it can be to approach situations with that not knowing. It lets us see things more clearly, without all that baggage.
Yeah, totally. So how do we actually practice this not
Right.
knowing? Does Ralston offer like exercises or practical steps?
He does. One practice he emphasizes, he calls it direct pointing. He suggests this exercise. You hold an everyday object, like a book, in your hand. But instead of labeling it as a book, right, you try to experience it as if you've never seen it before. So you feel its texture, its weight, you observe its shape and color, but without attaching any mental labels, any judgments, anything.
So it's about engaging all the senses, being present with it, and not the mental chatter we usually have.
Exactly. It's shifting from like conceptual understanding to just direct experience.
It's okay.
And from this place of kind of heightened awareness, Ralston introduces these two core practices. He calls them attention practices and awareness practices.
Okay, I like it, breaking it down. So attention practices, what are those all about?
Okay. Think of it like this. Your mind is a stage, and your thoughts, they're the actors, constantly vying for attention, right?
Right.
With attention practices, you become the audience.
Mm.
So you sit there, you observe your thoughts, your emotions as they come up. But you do it without judgment, without resistance, just noticing.
Okay.
It's like watching clouds moving across the sky.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's harder than it sounds because our minds are pretty
It
restless.
definitely takes practice.
Yeah.
But with practice, you can actually develop this greater awareness of those mental processes, all that chatter that normally goes by unnoticed.
Hmm.
And you begin to see that, oh, I'm not my thoughts.
Okay.
I'm the observer of my thoughts.
It's creating that space
Yeah.
between ourselves and our thoughts.
Yeah, and you realize you have a choice in how you respond to
Yeah.
them.
Okay, so then what are awareness practices? Because you said there were two.
Right, right. So awareness practices, they take that observation a step further. Once you're comfortable just noticing those thoughts, you then shift your attention to the awareness itself. You become aware of being aware.
Okay, now we're getting really meta.
Right.
It's like you're aware of the screen that the movie's playing on, not just the movie itself.
That's a great way to put it. And it's through these practices that Ralston says we can really start to kind of chip away at this illusion of a fixed self.
Okay.
And we start to glimpse this like more spacious and free way of being.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to say it's a little daunting.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you're being asked to, like, dismantle your entire understanding of yourself.
Right.
And rebuild from the ground up.
Yeah, you're right. It's not always easy work, but it can be so liberating. And remember, it's not about, reaching some perfect state of not knowing.
Yeah.
It's more about cultivating this sense of curiosity, this openness to experience. That's the key.
Yeah, approaching life as this ongoing exploration, not getting stuck on rigid beliefs about who we are, how things should be. Okay, I like that.
Exactly. Now, speaking of letting go of those rigid beliefs, Ralston also talks about this concept of distinctions.
Distinction. Okay, I don't know if I follow. How do distinctions fit into this?
Remember that example of the chair we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
How our view of that chair, it changed depending on our needs or the situation, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
the distinction.
Okay.
And Ralston says that our whole experience of reality is built on these distinctions. They're what give our world meaning and structure. Like we differentiate between hot and cold, light and dark, self and other.
So distinctions are like the mental categories we use to make sense of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And while making these distinctions can give us a sense of order, a sense of control even, Ralston argues that true freedom, it actually lies in recognizing their limitations. He says real power comes not from clinging to distinctions, but being able to see beyond them,
Okay.
to experience the world without needing to, label and categorize everything.
Okay. Now my brain's doing backflips.
Right.
So can you give me like an example? What does it even look like to see beyond distinctions? That's a hard one to grasp.
Okay, sure. Let's take, the concept of good and bad, right? We tend to categorize our experiences, people we meet, even our own thoughts and feelings as either good or bad, right?
Right. Yes.
But what if, just for a second, we could step outside of that duality? What if we could just experience things without immediately slapping a label on it of good or bad?
That is a radical idea.
Yeah.
But I can see how that would be incredibly freeing. It's like we're so conditioned to judge everything, put everything in these neat little boxes.
Yeah. And those boxes, they can become a prison if we're not careful. They can limit our experience and prevent us from seeing the full picture.
Totally. So then how do we start to dismantle those boxes, those habits of mind that we've built over so long?
Well, Ralston introduces this really fascinating framework for exploring different modes of experiencing reality. He calls them for me, for itself, and as itself.
For me, for itself, and as itself. Okay, break those down for me, please.
Okay, for me is the most common way we experience the world, unfortunately. It's like a self-centered perspective. Everything's filtered through our own needs and desires and fears, the what's in it for me approach.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that sometimes.
It's the default for most of us, but Ralston suggests it's a very limited perspective that keeps us kind of trapped in this cycle of craving and aversion.
Okay, so then for itself is about getting out of our own heads a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. For itself is about experiencing things without that filter of your own personal bias. It's like seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it would be or we're scared it might be. It's about recognizing that inherent value and worth in things, separate from our own needs.
That sounds really challenging, but also like incredibly rewarding, I would imagine.
It is. And that as itself is probably the most difficult to grasp
Okay.
because it's about transcending those distinctions altogether.
Okay.
It's about directly experiencing reality without any conceptual overlay whatsoever. Imagine experiencing the world without feeling any need to label anything, to categorize, to judge anything.
Yeah.
Just pure, unmediated experience.
Wow. Okay, that sounds incredibly profound,
It is.
but also very abstract.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to actually experience the world as itself?
Ralston argues that it is, but it requires like this radical shift in perspective, a willingness to just completely let go of our, habitual ways of seeing and interpreting reality.
So it's like we're retraining our brains how to see it.
Yeah.
It goes back to this idea of not knowing, right?
Right.
Approaching everything with a beginner's mind.
Exactly. And that's where the real transformation can happen, when we can let go of our preconceptions and just see the world with fresh eyes.
It's about like peeling back those layers, all that conditioning, those habits of perception that keep us from really experiencing things fully.
Exactly. And, remember that idea of the uncognized mind we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Ralston goes even deeper with that.
Okay.
And it gets pretty mind-bending.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me. It's a little unnerving when you think about all that activity that's happening
It is.
in our minds that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, but it's also, you can think about it as empowering.
Okay.
Once we start to understand how it works, imagine like driving a car, but you don't know how to, I don't know, change gears or use the turn signal.
Yeah.
You can get around, but it's going to be a little jerky, right?
Right. I can see where you're going with this.
That's kind of what the uncognized mind is like. It's running these programs in the background, all based on, old beliefs, past experiences, and we're totally oblivious to how it's affecting us.
So how do we become aware of these unconscious patterns? Ralston talks about contemplation.
Exactly, yeah. He describes it as this process of deep introspection. So turning our attention inward and like asking ourselves the tough questions, really shining a light on those hidden beliefs and assumptions that are kind of driving our actions.
It's like we become detectives of our own minds.
Yeah. And one technique he recommends is to like focus on a specific emotional reaction. So let's say I don't get really angry when someone cuts you off in traffic, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just reacting in the moment, you take some time afterward and really examine that anger. Ask yourself, what's this really about? Is it just about this one incident, or is there something deeper going on?
It's like looking for the root,
Yeah.
What's the belief system that's feeding this?
Exactly. Often you'll find these emotional reactions, they're based on beliefs we've been carrying since like childhood. And often those beliefs, they're not even true anymore.
Right. And we're letting these things that aren't even true control how we react to the world.
Yeah, and that's the thing about contemplation, right?
Yeah.
It lets us kind of bring those beliefs into the light, question them, and then choose, do we want to keep letting them run the show?
So it's about taking back control of our minds and our experience.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of just being a reactor, we become a more conscious creator.
I like that. Now, Ralston also talks about how we're constantly being affected by, our environment, our own thoughts. He calls these effects.
Right.
Effects. Can you talk more about that?
Sure, yeah. Think of it like this. Every single experience that we have, every interaction, every thought that pops into our head, it all leaves an imprint. It affects us in some way, right? And Ralston says becoming aware of these effects, that's really crucial to understanding how we create our own suffering.
So it's not just what happens to us, but how we're interpreting it, how we're allowing it to impact us.
Exactly. He gives this example of, you're walking down the street, you see a beautiful sunset.
Okay.
One person might look at that, they feel a sense of awe and wonder.
Hmm.
Another person caught up in their own thoughts, they might not even notice it at all.
Right.
And someone else might see that sunset and feel sad or have this sense of longing. The
Right.
sunset's the same.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just the effect it has is totally different.
Because we're all bringing our own stuff to it, right?
Exactly, yeah. Our own baggage. And so becoming aware of that, those patterns, that's essential, he says, for breaking free.
It makes me think of that quote, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
I love that quote. And that's exactly what he's talking about. It's not about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about changing how we relate to it.
Okay. So, how do we do that? How can we become more aware of those effects and actually start to change our relationship to them?
So one thing he recommends is just observing throughout your day, just observe those effects.
Okay.
Notice how your internal state changes in response to things. Pay attention to your thoughts, your feelings, what's happening in your body, what happens when you're around certain people, what happens when you do certain activities, what happens when you dwell on certain thoughts. Just notice.
Okay, so it's about observation without judgment.
Yeah. And as we become more aware of those effects, then we can start to dig a little deeper. What are the underlying beliefs that are driving them?
Okay.
Ask yourself, is this belief even true? Is
Uh,
it serving me? Or is it maybe time to let go?
yeah. Taking back our power from these unconscious patterns. Love it.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, speaking of those unconscious patterns,
Yeah.
Rolturi also talks about this idea of social survival.
Social survival. Okay, what's that all about?
So think about all the ways, all the little ways that we modify our behavior to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid rejection, right?
Okay.
We wear certain clothes, we say certain things, we might even adopt certain beliefs,
Right.
all in the name of social survival.
That feeling of wanting to be liked, to belong.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong inherently with wanting to be liked, wanting to belong. But he argues that this deep-seated need for approval, it can actually hold us back from truly expressing who we are.
Yeah, it's like we're so busy trying to be who we think other people want us to be
Yeah,
that we lose ourselves in the process.
exactly. And that leads to this feeling of being inauthentic, of emptiness and disconnection.
So how do we break free from that? From that need for approval? How do we start to live more authentically?
Well, Ralston says it starts with awareness.
Hmm.
The first step is just noticing, how are we trying to manage how other people see us?
Okay.
What masks are we wearing? What roles are we playing? And once we can see those patterns, then we can make a different choice.
So it's about being brave enough to take off the mask
Yeah.
and just be ourselves.
Exactly. And it takes courage to do that, to break free from that, from that conditioning. But the rewards, they're huge.
Yeah.
When we can live authentically, we open ourselves up to real connection, to fulfillment.
Totally. It's been so interesting unpacking all of this with you. And it's clear that Ralston, he's not offering like a quick fix.
No, not at all.
It's a journey, a
Absolutely.
total shift in perspective
Yeah.
to really understand who we are.
It's about waking up,
Yeah.
to the truth of who we are.
I love that. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the book of not knowing. This one's going to stay with me for a while.
It will.
So thank you so much for going on this journey with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And for everyone listening, if you're looking for a book that will challenge you, that will expand your perspective
Oh, sure.
and really empower you to live a more authentic and fulfilling life, this is it.
Definitely pick this one up.
And remember, this journey of self-discovery, it's ongoing. Be patient with yourself, stay curious, and just enjoy the ride.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.